First of all, thank you for having me here. I'm very happy that the organizing committee thought of having me here talking you about controversies in electronic cigarette research. Believe it or not, it seems to me that I spent the last 2 or 3 years revising an average of 2 or 3 papers or journal articles or newspapers conveying wrong messages or misinterpreting the science about electronic cigarette and e-vapor products. One of the problems, I believe, there is the major problem in the tobacco control community is, I believe, lack of common sense. This is not to say that I'm the best, the one with a lot of common sense, because, believe it or not, when I first started investigating electronic cigarettes, I was very skeptical about e-vapor products myself. It was only after a few months when I was engaging with people using it, people thanking me for letting them using these products to quit smoking, then I changed my mind. Another problem is that many of my colleagues in the tobacco control arena, they not just lack of common sense, but just choose to ignore it altogether for reasons they quite still don't understand. Another common problem, I believe, is that many of the researchers in the tobacco control arena are also quite arrogant in them not recognizing that they don't know the products. How can you construct a protocol? How can you build up a protocol, a study design, if you do not understand what you're studying? How can you study a drug if you don't understand the pharmacokinetics or pharmacodynamics? It's impossible. That's what we are facing today, and I think that's what will be the focus of my talk today. We need to talk about this. It's because the combination of lack of common sense and the excess of arrogance in this community, it will be a terrible cocktail for public health in general. Next. So let me start with this initial one, which, it's media storm, a typical media storm from newspaper from UK saying that e-cigarettes may be a cause of exposure to cancerogenic substances. And why people from journals are saying that? Next slide. I don't quite get it. This is again about common sense. If you just focus on the very right end of this panel, you will see a 3D color spectrogram which illustrates number of constituents in panel above tobacco smoke compared panel below e-cigarette aerosol emission. And you will see immediately there's a huge difference in terms of constituents being present in tobacco smoke versus e-cigarette aerosol emissions. And in essence, when we think of cancerogenic substances, we have to think of an average of 100 to 500 in tobacco smoke compared to only about 5 in e-cigarette aerosol emission. So this provides the substance to many of the statements, particularly the one from Public Health England, saying that electronic cigarettes are 95% less dangerous, less harmful than electronic cigarettes. So there are chemicals There are chemicals that may be of concern. I'm not saying electronic cigarettes are 100% risk-free, but what it is nowadays, not even the water that we drink is 100% risk-free. And this is the very infamous New England Journal research letter from Pankoff's group in Portland, who stated that electronic cigarette emissions can be more dangerous than than cigarettes. One problem with this kind of research is that the researchers didn't quite understand what normal condition of use is. I will explain this in the next 3 slides. Next one. Okay, so if you take distinguished researchers for a very famous university in the US and you do an experiment where you don't understand the product, you get trouble, you get into trouble. So we have here Konstantino Farsalinos and his group in Greece replicating exactly the same experiment, but this team in Greece know what they're doing, know the product, know what a normal condition of use is. And you will see what happens. If you compare, okay, in red, you will see an atomizer with a single wick. I'm sorry to use quite a technical jargon here, but it's important. In order to vaporize liquid, you have a coil. The coil gets hot, and the liquid which is funneled through the wick will vaporize. If you have a single wick, it is possible that under stressful conditions, so when you puff a lot or you use a lot of energy, you may get dry wick and dry coil, and you may generate thermocombusted toxicants. With 2 wicks, this is the working hypothesis, this is less likely. So you will see here that at low power, when you use a lot less energy, you don't actually generate concernful level of carbonyls. If you instead start using very high power, which are at the limit of normal use, I can tell you, I tried to switch vapors from Ego style, second generation, simple products, to very sophisticated hardware like this. They cannot do it. They cannot inhale. They start coughing. It's very difficult, believe me. So, you really need to have some field experience to try and understand and to try and design studies like that. So at high power, you will see a lot of dangerous chemicals only if the wick gets dry, red, because you have a single wick, so you don't get enough liquid on top of the coil, and a very high power. But this condition is not normal. It's stressful. Next one. Very quick. It's all about having the same thing which is not the same. Next one. Think of your toast in the morning. If you put the toast in the toaster for 1 minute, that's fine. But if you leave the toaster for 3 minutes and you burn it like this, you will have a lot of nasty chemicals, a lot of nitrosamines, and a lot of cancerogenic substances. This is exactly the same concept. Okay, next one. I really think that the focus of our research should be shifted from aerosols and smoke into human bodies, because this will give us a better understanding of what's going on and what's the real level of risk. So I would rather invest in research that is clearing the smoke in the area of toxicant exposure reduction. And this is very simple. It only takes urinary biomarkers of metabolites of supposedly cancerogenic of chemical substances present either in the tobacco smoke or in the electronic cigarette aerosol emission. The next 3 slides will simply illustrate, and I'll summarize that for you so you don't have to go through the slides yourself, that the level of biomarkers of exposure after switching to vaping is much, much reduced compared to when the vapor was a smoker. To me, as a clinician, as a doctor, that's a clear illustration that people get exposed to less toxicants when they switch to vaping. And these are, I can just comment 1 or 2 very quickly. This is a study from an Imperial College showing on your left-hand side of this panel what happens when you're a smoker. The acrolein, which is the metabolite has this funny name, 3-HPMA, but it's acrolein. Acrolein is a toxicant, it's an irritant. It's not good to have acrolein inside your body, in essence. But smokers do have a lot of acrolein because they smoke. Acrolein is in tobacco smoke. And you will see acrolein in form of metabolite in the urine of a smoker. However, already 4 weeks later, when you switch to vaping, the level of acrolein is very much reduced, but more than 3-fold in 4 weeks. And this happens also when you are a dual users, red bars. To cut a long story short, in the next 2 slides, there'll be similar example of longitudinal studies where you see reduction in biomarkers of exposure. This will not only limit it to acrolein, but will also extend to NNK, to benzene, ethylene oxide, and butadiene. In all these cases, the level of toxicants will be much reduced when you switch to vaping. Next one. This is exactly the same situation, another study. There are at least now half a dozen of studies concordant showing the same positive results. Next one. So, cancer. We don't have epidemiological evidence to prove that electronic cigarette will reduce the burden of cancer in France, in Europe, or in the world. However, we can use a model. And the model is naturalistic model is the use of chewable tobacco in the form of snus. Snus is a pasteurized form of tobacco, nitrosamine-free tobacco, which is very commonly used in Scandinavian countries, particularly in Norway and Sweden, where it's been used for many decades. So you have a long, long history. You can build up a nice story from epidemiological data in the population. Why I'm using snus? Snus is chewable, so it doesn't contain any toxicants from combustion of tobacco, and yet has even more nicotine than nicotine in the cigarette smoke. And you will see, interestingly, that in Sweden, there is, okay, let's take as an example those nations with the same baseline, which is easier to understand. So let's take Sweden in red and Italy in green. You will see during the explosion of tobacco smoking, because it was fashionable, because nobody knew it was dangerous, there was a high picking up in Italy in green. It was fashion. I remember my parents were offering tobacco cigarettes to the guests coming to visit their house, and they didn't smoke. It was a customary thing to do. So it was picking up, and then after in the 90s and the 80s and the 90s, there were the tobacco control policies, and of course the green line and the prevalence of lung cancer rates is diminishing. But in Sweden, because of snus usage, there's been a very little picking up of lung cancer prevalence, and the lung cancer prevalence stays very low, the lowest in the European Union nations. So this is to tell you that the problem is not the few toxicants in the e-cigarette aerosol emissions, but the lots of toxicants in the combustion of the cigarette. So I have a question for you. Are you concerned about cancer risk in vapors? We? Oh my God, I lost my time then. In any case, even if you are convinced that still there is a risk, bear in mind that these products are still evolving. And I remember very well when I entered the research in electronic cigarettes 7 years ago, the first products were containing much more chemicals than the one that we are testing today. And the one that we'll be producing tomorrow will contain even less chemicals. So the future looks bright. I'm not sure how many minutes I've left, because this combination of the translator coming after me is consuming time. But I can talk for hours if you like. Of course not. And I just need to understand, Bertrand, do you have 5 more minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
You are over 10 minutes.
Okay, so I'll stop here. Basically, what I can say is that there's a lot of media. You know, journalists like just bad news. Bad news sells a lot. The problem is, for studies like this, there are a bunch of researchers that they're trying to set up studies, not knowing the products, not knowing the behavior, and what ends up is producing junk data, and journalists picking up the junk data and making a mess of it. So media storm, people being worried and concerned about electronic cigarette. And today, you just showed the first slides. I think, Bertrand, you showed that people, even in this country, are starting to believe that electronic cigarettes are quite dangerous, where, in fact, they're not. So it is just a problem of education and trying to understand. And it's a pity. I'm glad that you are here, trying to listen to me, trying to have an informational debate about science, about interpretation of the data. And I feel very sorry for those who didn't come today, because it would have been very instructive to have a face-to-face discussion with these people, trying to meet in the middle and trying to have a common goal, which we have. The common goal is to save lives from tobacco combustibles. The problem is that we think we have a better way and they think they're on a better way. There's no better way. There's actually integration that is needed. Tobacco harm reduction via vaping does not exclude tobacco control policies. Actually, implementing tobacco harm reduction fortify tobacco control policies. Full stop. Very simple. So nobody has to worry about anything. Something I've learned over these years is try not to be arrogant enough to understand everything about vaping. So when I design studies, I really talk to vapers, because they know a lot about the product, the behavior, and everything else. So that was a very important message. And I think most of the researchers all around the world, they should change their research model of being close in the ivory towers of academic industries and being more open to the civilized society, including vapers, because they can learn a lot about how to design proper studies. Next slide. Okay, let's keep this one about the Surgeon General, because I don't really want to fight against the Surgeon General. Okay, this one back. This is a very funny one. I have to show you. I'm sorry. I have to take this time to show it. It's about a study from California University about the e-cigarette vaping and the risk of bronchitis in young students. Next. What the paper says is essentially there's a high frequency of cough and respiratory symptoms in young electronic cigarette users versus non-users. Okay, this is not a big deal. we have a respiratory system and we have reflexes that protect our respiratory systems from attacks from the environment. So even if a smoker starts vaping, start coughing. This is not a diagnosis of COPD or chronic bronchitis. This is self-reported coughing. So these kids were asked about self-reported coughing. The media storm was saying 25% of Southern Californian students have developed chronic bronchitis. Oh my God, chronic bronchitis, in my medical knowledge tells me, is a disease of the elderly smokers, not of the young smokers. So, you know, it's clear that the message was wrong from the outset. So once again, this is all about lack of knowledge, lack of misinterpretation of the data, and over-representation of the harm about the data. Next. You see, this is what happens in a randomized controlled trial of electronic cigarette. There's a lot of reporting of cough at baseline because they are smokers. They cough in the morning. It's pretty normal. However, 12 weeks, 24 weeks, and at 52 weeks after switching to vaping, the number of reported coughs has basically disappeared. You know, people has adjusted to vaping, so no more reflex coughing, and there's not even coughing from tobacco cigarettes because they are not smoking anymore. Next one, next one. And just to conclude, I know there are a lot of physicians in the room. COPD can improve with vaping. We hear a lot about people, about vapor from electronic cigarette that can create respiratory problems. However, if you switch to vaping and you're a COPD smoker, in 2 years, you will see a big improvement in your respiratory outcomes. Thank you very much.